the DevOps Huddle, episode 19. Now, this is part 2 of a 3-part series that we've been running about our Unified Insights capabilities, and more specifically, about our new GitHub Copilot measuring capabilities, being able to measure GitHub Copilot, as well as the downstream impact of what happens when you use GitHub Copilot. So if you missed part one was all about GitHub Copilot, what you're measuring, developer activity, actual usage, and then also, licensing, how much of your license are being used, all those great capabilities we have. Now this is part 2, where we're going to take what we learned in part 1 and apply it to what happens after somebody commits their code, right? What happens downstream, and being able to measure that impact with DORA. Now, if you're not familiar with DORA, it's not a big deal. We'll cover it later in this webinar. We'll cover all about it, so you'll be fully informed. But let's start with a nice little introduction. So I'd like to say hello to my panelists today, Ed and Gilbert. So I'd love for them to introduce themselves. Ed, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'm Ed Slatt. I'm a sales engineer here at Opsera. I spent most of my career as a developer up until about maybe 7 years ago when I got into DevOps. I worked at GitLab for 4 years. I had 4 roles in customer success over those 4 years, and I've been at Opsera for the past 14 months. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So glad to have you, Ed. And I'd also like to introduce Gilbert. Gilbert, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I'm a VP of Post Services here at Opsera. Before Opsera, I was a VP of DevOps and Cloud Operations, building DevOps teams and building DevOps, processes and infrastructure. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. And great to have 2 people who understand what it's like to both run and lead and be contributing members of development teams, and also understand what it means to improve the performance of those teams. So I think you guys are great panelists, and we're going to get started here. But first, we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to do a little poll. So I'm going to invite Aditi to run a poll for us. And why don't you go for it?
Thank you. I'm just gonna ask you guys just a couple of questions. You should be able to see them. Is your organization currently using GitHub Copilot? And is your organization currently using GitHub?
Yeah, and to clarify, right, if you're using GitHub Copilot, that would be for AI pair programming assistance. But if you're using GitHub, that would be for, source code management or something like GitHub Actions. All right.
Just another second for everyone to answer. And it looks like we've got a pretty even split between yes and no for everyone using GitHub Copilot, and for GitHub. GitHub, everyone is using.
And that makes sense to me. If we think about it, right, GitHub Copilot is pretty new to the market, but everybody at least heard about it. Maybe they're not using it yet. Maybe you're not totally on board with it yet, but GitHub is a leader in source code management, so it makes sense for everybody to be quite on board with using GitHub. So great, it's nice to know sort of where everybody stands before we get rolling with this webinar. So, like I said, this is part 2 of a 3-part series, and so in order for us to sort of close the loop on what it means to use GitHub Copilot and what it means for your business, we have a part 3 coming up in July. It will be July 25th at 11 a.m. Pacific, and it will be all about uniting GitHub Copilot with developer experience and making sure your security posture is safe. So maybe you learned, yes, you're using GitHub Copilot to improve developer productivity, efficiency, those commits are being accepted into production. But what does that mean for the developer? Are developers actually achieving, greater satisfaction with their work? Are they doing things better? Are they feeling positively about how GitHub Copilot is helping them? And also, is your business taking a hit to security by using this new technology? And how do you know? How do you measure it? So it's all part 3, and we'd love for you to join us for that as well. Definitely go ahead and scan this QR code for a little landing page that'll give you a place to sign up. We'll also flash this at the end so that you have another chance to sign up if you miss it now. Okay, so great. Now we get into the meat of this business today. So for everybody who maybe has heard about GitHub Copilot or is using it, but maybe you're not really familiar with DORA and why we're on the call today, we're going to give you a little introduction to what is DORA. So DORA is a 10-year-long research and assessment program, the DevOps research and assessment program run by Google. So they've been running it a long time. It's a bunch of really great people who are really interested in understanding what capabilities, what technologies, and what processes actually drive higher delivery performance, right? They're really interested in boiling down all of the different things that actually lead to better organizational performance. They have spent years really understanding from code to commit, what do you need to be successful as a business, as a team, as a personal developer? And so they've they've interviewed and surveyed thousands of developers and thousands of organizations across these 10 years and have issued really awesome information over the course of this time. Opsera was fortunate to be able to be a sponsor of the 2023 DevOps State of DevOps report, DORA State of DevOps report. So you can definitely get that at this link. But we're also really pleased to be a sponsor of the 2024 upcoming report. So if you sign up for this report from 2023, which you can download for free now, we will also inform you when the 2024 report comes out, because that'll be the newest and greatest information. We're really excited to be able to have been sponsors of last year and sponsors of this year as well. So yes, awesome info. And I'm going to hand it over to Ed now, who's going to take you into the DORA Core 4. That is what we're really going to focus on today, which are the core 4 metrics that DORA focuses on. Take it away, Ed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so like Anna said, Google put a lot of effort and research into high-performing technology teams. They started 10 years ago. They spent a lot of resources on this. And what trickled out from all of that research is these big 4 KPIs. So after all was said and done, they said, hey, if you measure these 4 things, you're going to have your arms around what's happening with respect to software delivery in your organization. So we'll walk through these quick. Let's say I'd like to start with lead time for change. The bottom left here, this is how long it takes to go from idea to delivered value to your customers, whatever that means for your organization. So you want to be able to do this quickly. This is how you hear about, deliver software better, faster. This is the faster piece of that. Above that is deployment frequency. How fast can you run that play? How often are you getting these stories that you're able to translate into value? So these two together come together to give you total delivery speed. This is your throughput. This is how fast your organization is able to go. Now on the right, we kind of have the constraining pieces. So on the bottom right, change failure rate. How often when you introduce a change or when you deploy to prod, did you introduce trouble or some incident that has to be resolved? So that's your change failure rate. You want that to be low. You want it to trend lower, but you would never strive to make that 0, because to do that, your lead time for change would have to go very high. You'd have to put so much rigor and testing and approvals into your process that basically your throughput would grind to a halt. So you want your change failure rate to be low, but you would never try to make it to go to 0. There's going to be problems, and that gets us into the 4th metric, which is MTTR, mean time to resolution, or time to restore. So when something bad happens and things become unstable, how long does it take you to identify that problem and back it out? Get back to steady state, get back to things working. A very important characteristic for a system. So really, really quick, we see DORA coming in and being useful for 2 main reasons. One is maybe I'm a manager and I'm in charge of making software delivery better for my organization. The first thing I have to figure out is, what does that even mean, right? How am I going to represent that? At the end of the quarter, I'm going to put some things in place. I'm going to figure some things out. But at the end of the quarter, I'm going to want to show, hey, this is software delivery before, and this is software delivery after all this great stuff that I did. What am I going to show in those 2 slides? Well, the answer to that question is DORA. You know, a lot of organizations and a lot of people try to go roll their own, and they figure it out. And I'm going to measure commits hitting the server, and I'm going to measure this or that. But what came out of all of the resources that Google put into this research is these 4 KPIs. The answer to that question is these 4 KPIs. No need to roll your own. One of the stories I like to tell here is I used to be, when I was a developer, I used to be very proud of my ability to automate testing. You know, whatever the gnarly problem was or application was, I would figure out a way to go in there and build out some tests that can be run as part of the pipeline. And then, you know, you can't get back into main or you can't get back into dev until you pass this test. And I thought that was fantastic. And it was easy to sell to my management. But what ended up happening is those tests sometimes would be so complicated and cumbersome that I was the only person that could maintain them. And all of a sudden, I introduced a bottleneck into our process. So lead time for change would go down, actually. So and the other problem there was that my colleagues had trouble making that point. If you don't have DORA, they had trouble arguing against these tests that I was saying were so great. But if you have DORA and you trust that DORA, you can say, all right, Ed, let's watch change failure rate. And let's see if it changes. Let's back out that test and replace that big gnarly test with these 3 little simple tests and see how change failure rate is affected. And if it's not affected poorly, let's make a decision to cut out that big test. So another way that if you have DORA that you trust, this is the way that you can leverage it going forward. Let's see, support SLAs. The other piece I want to show here is, to show how these things kind of play together, is mean time to restore. What would happen if I said, hey, I know we've been running 24/7 support, but I don't think problems really happen in off work hours. And I think we would be okay just supporting during working hours. You know, what you can do, if you have MTTR that you trust, you could test that. You can run some application with that SLA for a couple of weeks, watch your MTTR and see if it gets hammered. If MTTR doesn't change much, you might find that 24/7 support isn't worth the squeeze. So another kind of instance where you can use DORA to make things better in your organization. Okay, next slide. All right, so I sold you now on DORA. DORA is fantastic and you want to do it. And I explained how simple those metrics are. So maybe you want to go create these things yourself. You know, all I have to do is start the clock here and end it here and run this calculation and I have DORA, right? So I'll go do this myself. There are some challenges with setting this up. We see this all the time with organizations. They come out of the gates, they're going to do this themselves. And these are some of the things that they hit. So the first thing is aggregating data. A lot of these KPIs, they do span tools. So you have to harvest the data from the different tools. You have to aggregate it across it and make sure things make sense. Otherwise, you start to get DORA metrics that aren't valid. That's not consistent with what's really happening. So that's a challenge. And that challenge is exacerbated by the fact that you probably have a couple different combinations of tools, even inside your organization across your verticals, right? This team isn't doing it this way. They're using these tools. This other team has a whole different concept of what it means to deploy. So now you have to aggregate, but you have to do it a couple different ways according to these combinations of tools. The next piece that comes in here is you've sold DORA to your leadership. You know, everybody agrees this is a good thing. We need to have it. And now there's pressure. We want it now. We don't want to wait till next quarter to get this. What can you show us, you know, as soon as possible? So here's this pressure to produce quickly. But, you know, don't affect my developers. You know, these developers are working on these other problems and their schedules aren't to be changed, you know, so there's, you know, another competing thing that happens. 2 more things, risk, right? What is there out there? What are the unknowns that you're getting yourself into here when you try to break this off for yourself? And then finally, updates and maintenance. The idea fairy comes out immediately. You know, it's great that we have DORA and we have these KPIs, but can you give me side-by-side comparisons between team A and team B? Or can you give me side-by-side comparisons between this sprint and that sprint last time? You know, these kind of requests are going to come trickling in, and they will be problematic. So I'm going to pause there for a second. I mentioned earlier about downstream pieces associated with lead time for delivery, and to talk more about that, will be Gilbert.
All right. All right. Well, thanks guys. So what are downstream metrics? I think yeah. So I'm gonna take a little bit of a step back and really talk about what the industry calls, metrics, right? And I'm going to talk about, I think, three different frameworks out there in the industry, which could be very confusing to all of us, right? Like, we've been talking about DORA and how DORA, has four metrics that Google has led the industry, and now has been a standard, lead time for changes, um, MTTR, which is now and has a new name called failed deployment recovery time. You have change frequency rate, and then you have deployment frequency, right? So these are all like system productivity metrics, right? So I just want to kind of clear up the maybe a little bit of the confusion just on looking at frameworks, right? There's three different frameworks, which is DORA, Space, and now a new framework called DevX, right? So it could be super confusing. It could be like, what do I use? Why is DORA so important? Right. And I know we don't have a lot of time because that could be a whole huddle by itself. So I'm really just gonna kind of give you examples of what we see out there that works the best for DORA metrics. And then I'll talk a little bit about demystifying the inner loop and outer loop and where DORA fits versus where it doesn't fit. Right. So let's just, talk about the inner loop really quick, right? The inner loop here is all about developer key metrics, right? And don't confuse these with DORA metrics because it's very easy to try to fit developer productivity into DORA. Right? Like kind of like what Ed just mentioned about tying his test and then downstreaming to the DevOps, what I call the outer loop, which is all the system metrics, right? When it comes to key measurements on the developer side, the developers really don't necessarily fit in that, I'll call it, DORA metric space. They are participants of that from a downstream perspective, but developers really want to code, right? So you really have to think of developer productivity as um, two buckets. I put them into activity metrics and efficiency metrics. Activity metrics are things like, hey, closing tickets, closing pull requests, deployments, shipping code, and an opportunity to make those flows, right? Where efficiency from an inner loop, right? And efficiency becomes to like, does my engineer feel productive? Um, is he more productive with having less meetings? Is there a no meeting day? Is there a 2 hours of focus times of uninterrupted time that the developer can code, right? It's not about how many times he committed the code or how many pull requests he created. Those are a little bit more activity metrics, but that's what I call the inner loop, right? So let's now look at the outer loop, which I think this is what the session's about. It's about DORA metrics. And what we see in the industry and what we see the organizations be very, I'll call it DevOps transformative and um, very efficient, I'll call it, or very effective, I will, is when you take the context of moving, the industry has been moving from, I'll call it, a batch releases to a continuous delivery model, right? That's where DORA comes in, where you can start actually seeing the delivery and how fast of a delivery you're doing from moving from a batch, I'll call it, or a monolith application to a microservices application. And then how fast did that needle move? Again, DORA metrics are also an education, right? It's a muscle memory. Like you also have to educate your community about DORA metrics, because it's not going to be day one, but it's really up to your management team to really clearly identify what are your, what does productivity mean within your organization, right? So you're able to understand the metrics and then bubble that up to the executive team and leadership. So let me pause there. And I'll, again, I'll just pause there and let, give it back to Ed.
Okay, thank you, Gilbert. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so we said earlier in the agenda that we're why GitHub Copilot and DORA. This is part of a Copilot series. Why are we talking about DORA now? And this is something I'm actually really excited about. So GitHub Copilot came out, and it's definitely promising productivity and things that the organizations care about. It's wildly successful, and it's being onboarded like crazy right now. But really, what does it do for the organization? You really want to be able to show a return on that investment. So what can we measure to get that done? That's where DORA comes in. We don't want to start now trying to create our own metrics to prove the return on Copilot. We don't have to. Google already made that effort. We can just leverage that investment. So that's where Copilot plus DORA comes in, and it's something I'm really excited about. Let's see here. So, but what data is available? And this is kind of where the rub is. So Copilot, GitHub Copilot came out recently with an API that provides usage data, but that usage data is kind of at a level, it's at that inner loop level, and it's not necessarily something that the organization sees and cares about immediately. You know, when you talk about return, if you want to pitch or if you want to show your leadership that Copilot is working out, if you talk about hit rates as far as suggestions that are accepted, that's not going to resonate with them. You really want to get down to the DORA level. So at that point, you want to be able to associate the Copilot usage with the DORA metrics. But that data that comes out of GitHub isn't at that level. It doesn't give you down to the user or even the projects. So drawing that correlation can be challenging. So with that, I do want to get in and show you our solution to these problems, and we'll kind of show what we're doing on that front. To start the demo here, just quickly, I want to set this foundation. We are a DevOps platform. We do a lot of different things, but right now we're looking at our tool registry. So as an onboarding function, you come in here to our platform and you start to register the tools that you're already using. And many of those tools publish metrics. And when they do, we harvest those metrics on your behalf so that we can do things and we can aggregate that data and make insights from that data, including the Copilot usage data. So, and DORA. So we mentioned earlier that DORA spans these different tools. Because we have this registry of all these tools, we're able to aggregate that data, transform that data, and give you valid DORA metrics. So I mentioned one of the challenges is that aggregation. It's also all those different tool combinations. We have 8 patents approved, 9 patents pending. Some of those patents do apply to our data transformation and aggregation, and that results in our ability to do DORA in a valid way against many different combinations of tools. So we're looking at our DORA dashboard right here. We can focus this on particular organizations and things like that. We have deployment frequency at the top left, change failure rate underneath it, lead time for changes, and mean time to resolve. I'll show you, we can click into any of these. The first thing I'll show is change failure rate. If you click into one of these KPIs, we start to give you a graphical representation of the data. We also give you a table of all the data points that got rolled into that representation and into that top number for that KPI. So we give you all of that. There's a lot of different ways you can investigate the data, but I just wanted to point that out. The next piece I want to show is taking it back to Copilot. So here is our Copilot dashboard, and this is where we're taking that usage data from the API, and we're showing it to you here, which is very useful. You can see adoption rate, how many of the users that have access to DORA are using it. We can see acceptance rate and quality suggestions. This is, when Copilot returns something, are they tab completing and accepting that suggestion? Are they typing over it and rejecting these suggestions? So that's all here, useful stuff, but it's not how healthy your organization is with respect to software delivery. That's DORA. This is kind of like, is the model working? Are your people using it? I kind of think of it as a tachometer in a car, and maybe your temperature gauges here. Important, but it's not what you want to report out. So what you really want to do is you want to associate your Copilot usage with your DORA metrics. And unfortunately, these the API published by GitHub doesn't give you that granularity, doesn't give you that resolution. But because we are a platform and we have hooks into all these different tools, we have this holistic approach about what's happening in your organization. We're able to suss out which commits are done by with use of Copilot versus which aren't. And once we can start to associate commits with Copilot usage, all of a sudden we can trickle that information into these different KPIs that are important to us. So for instance, lead time for changes does have a dependence on commits when commits are hitting the server. And because of that, now we can start to add elements to these interfaces, like I'm showing here. When I tab over this icon, I'm showing this is all of the lead time for this organization, right? But if I come over here, because it does have a dependence on commits, and because we can do that association with commits to Copilot usage, now I have a toggle and I can say, give me this DORA metric, give me lead time for changes just for Copilot users, right? And similarly or inversely, give me lead time for changes for non-Copilot users. So in this way, we can connect Copilot to actual benefits to the organization that the leadership recognizes, which is DORA. So let me stop here. Are there any questions coming in?
There is one question I see here. Someone's just wondering, where do you start, or how can you get started?
How about if I start that one? So where to get started? Basically, where you're at, right? So you definitely want to start to get metrics on the tools that you're using. It doesn't take many tools to start to get some kind of DORA out. So start where you're at, start collecting metrics. And Anna, can you, I think we have a program going where we can help start to put that together.
Absolutely. I'm excited to share this with you. So, in addition to the GitHub Copilot's dashboard that Ed shared with you, we also have a DORA dashboard. So what Ed shared with you, we have a 14-day free trial just for you to get started and see it. So if you sign up here at this QR code, you'll bring 4 of your tools. You'll connect them in under an hour. We'll connect them for you in under an hour. And you'll be able to see, your GitHub Copilot metrics. You'll see what we showed you. And then you'll be able to understand how it's being used, who's using the licensing, all that good stuff. And then as part of our GitHub Insights bundle, we have the DORA dashboard. So it's a really, really easy way for you to just get started with a tool that is right out of the box. There's obviously, for like Gilbert said earlier, for a cultural shift, you have to decide what does success look like for you. DORA's done all that work, right? They've done 10 years worth of research to decide what is successful. Why don't you just go out of the box and try it, right? So that's what we're trying to do here for you, is make it an easy way for you to bring the tools that you're already using, bring the teams to the table. If you've got 100 developers or more, you can get a free trial today. So totally recommend. Aditi put the link in the chat as well if you need to use it. But yeah, this is an easy way to get started, and we're really excited to be able to bring it to you. One of the only ones on the market for you, so no risk way of just getting started right now. So yeah, I wanted to say very much thank you to Ed and Gilbert for your time today on this webinar, because you brought a lot of really good information to us. I know it can be sort of overwhelming, especially that inner loop and outer loop activity information. And so I will recommend again that you join us for the next episode next month, where we'll explore more of that developer experience idea. We'll dive further into what it means to take GitHub Copilot, to take DORA, to take your security posture. How is it actually impacting your developer performance and what they're enjoying about their jobs? So highly recommend you join us for that as well. I've put the QR code here for you for a quick way to sign up. And then I will also flash the 14-day free trial again for the remainder of the webinar. But I wanted to say thanks everyone for attending. Thank you to Ed and Gilbert for being our panelists today. And thank you to Aditi for monitoring the chat.
Thank you guys. Thank you for having us. And we look forward to, hearing more questions, and looking forward to how you use GitHub Copilot and how has it been with your experience.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.